Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video we'll watch how I created this drawing in Procreate on an iPad Pro 9.7 inch. Then we'll draw a image layer so we can create a rich media comic using the comic machine. To start off with, let's refer to the script. In this script for the Roommate from Another Galaxy, we have a rough sketch that I did. It's a pretty small thumbnail, and the text that goes with it is actually started from here and ends there. So the this character says something, and then this character says something, and then back to this guy, and then back to him again. We're gonna have limited animation. There's gonna be this girl here is infatuated with this handsome guy, so we're going to make little hearts above her head that are going to be animated. So before we get into the time lapse of the drawing, let's look at the finished file in Procreate. I've turned off all layers and I'm going to turn them on one by one. At the bottom there is the rough thumbnail sketch of the from the script. Again, I could have done this in Procreate very easily. It just so happens I did in Photoshop originally. On top of that, I did I'll turn it up more, is a more tighter rough of it, so that I have something more accurate to work with when I'm doing the final line. Number one here is a folder. Actually, I'm going to open that up, and layer 3 is actually, I'm going to turn this on. Layer 3 is the line work. The white layer, layer 7 here, is a white block out of the background. So basically it's just a solid white, so that I have a solid figure to work with. On top of that is the gray layer, or just put G there. So this is the base shading. I'm just going to turn off the palette there. And then on top of that I have a darker defining shading, or core shadow, whatever you might call it. It's basically just the darker values that give it definition. Underneath this folder 1, I have just a rough, I'm going to turn off the rough here. It's just a rough out of focus sort of background, nondescript. You don't have to get too there's no line work, it's just shading, just so that it doesn't interfere with the foreground. And it's just the hallway of a university. One is the actual windows, and then the other one is the trees in the background. And above all this is the hearts. No, there's 2 of them, so that we can alternate between the 2 to get you the animation. But turn down the opacity on the top one, you'll see that it's just slightly out of phase, so that when they alternate, they look like they're flickering. And then above that I have a color layer filter. This is, if I open it up, it's just color. Actually, under the color, as far as the color selection is I'm just using the color, and I put in basically a dark blue. And as far as the color layer, when the more black in that, the less color is actually imparted onto the image below it. So if you have a solid blue, it would be quite vivid. I want it very subtle, so it'll be a bluish black that I've now if I just convert that to a normal layer, you can see the color I'm using actually. Now, if that was a bright blue, then it would actually be it'd be too overpowering actually. So here's the time lapse of the actual drawing process. Usually I start in on the head. So underneath is the rough thumbnail. So I'm doing a tighter rough in blue. Doing it blue so it differentiates between the gray underneath. As you see, I started in on the head first, and I'll just rewind that. You know, it's up to you how you like to start, but I usually do a circle for the skull part of the head, just like how you learn in drawing class. Especially if you're doing three figures that have to be in sync as far as size to each other. Doing a circle would sort of give you a basis to start from. And because you're drawing it digitally, I mean, you can draw it anywhere and then just shift it into place. You can see that I drew it too far forward and I drew it too big, so I wanted to make this guy overpoweringly handsome and big, so I made his head a little bit smaller in relation, and I did the same with the girl here. So in the final, once you get to the outline of the figures and sort of resolved all the anatomical figures, you can turn off the thumbnail or just delete it. So here you go in. When you're working on the blue line on the rough, you always have to, it'd be good to have an eraser, a very light eraser, so you can actually, once the line gets too messy, you can bring down the line a bit, so you can actually refine it. So here, because I'm drawing it myself, I mean, if you're doing it the Marvel way, where you're actually handing it off to somebody, you probably want to do a tighter rough, but since I'm doing it myself, this level of roughness is good enough for me. I come from the advertising world, so it's a lot of it is seat of the pants type of thing, so you kind of wing it. And when you're doing it digitally, you have more freedom to wing it, just because it's more forgiving. You can actually erase it out completely. Here what I'm doing is I'm focusing on the outline first. I'm trying to get because there's so much there's like three people in this shot. I want to actually separate the three objects, so I'm doing a darker line to at first. I mean, you can totally do it afterwards, but at this point I'm not sure why I did it this way. And for the outline, I used a a larger brush, of course, and a darker brush with more opacity. Then I go in on the interior more lightly. As you can see, I tried to not make the lines on the interior too overpowering. And you can still, there's still the gray and the darker shading to be applied. It's always nice to give a variance of line. So as you see in my other videos, if you have a chiseled sketch pen, you can alter the line without actually even adjusting the size of the brush by just tilt the brush or angle it in a certain way, and that would adjust the size. No, it's when I'm drawing with a brush, I'm just going to pause there for a sec. I always have my left hand on the controls for the opacity and size for easy access. I'm always adjusting the size up and down, the opacity. As I mentioned, I don't know if I made a video about this, but the smaller the brush, the more opacity you need to get the same effect. So say you have a medium-sized brush and you want to achieve a certain blackness. If you bring down the brush size, you have to increase the opacity to get the same blackness, because the smaller the brush, the less ink is absorbed by the screen. It's just one way to put it. So here I'm applying the gray layer. The reason I do it in layers, the 2 layers of gray, is because as you can see here, I'm just gonna rewind it here, is so that you can actually, I call it sculpting a layer. So I'm doing a shade here. You can see I actually bring back the, I actually use an eraser with the same shape as the brush, and I use that to create, you know, create shapes that would be hard to achieve by just using the positive image of the brush. You see right there and the neck there. I created that the neck muscle by just erasing back this gray. See that again there, yeah. And that gives you, it looks fresher that way, I think. Because you can actually apply a gray that's fairly general in as far as shape, and then actually chisel it back with an eraser. Now you don't want to do that too much, just so that, you know, it doesn't look too overworked. So here again, I'm applying the black layer. No, there's the line layer, as I mentioned before, and then there's the gray layer, and then there's a black, a dark layer. I don't know what best to call it, like a core shadow layer, where I apply the black. Oh, it's important not to actually use that layer to actually follow exactly the gray underneath, because it would just defeat the purpose. It actually is more of adds definition to the shading. As you can see here, so what I did is I applied a black defining shadow on his jeans here. Now that's too nebulous. It's just like, you know, doesn't have any definition or detail of it. So what you do is you take an eraser and actually erase it back. You actually, you know, bring back some of the folds of the jeans, the shirt. Same here. So I mean, really, you can add as many layers as possible, but it gets too crazy after a while. So right here, I'm applying on another layer the background, and that doesn't, as I mentioned before, it doesn't have to be too detailed because it's in the background. You want it actually not too obtrusive, anyways. So it's a very light brush, broad brush. And there's the hearts that are above her head. So what I did was actually draw the first layer of the hearts, and then bring down the opacity, and then use that to work the second layer of hearts. So that's basically it. And then just small retouching, adding reflective highlights, and then the color layer. So let's go back to the Procreate file on the iPad, and what we're going to do now is to export 2 files, one with the hearts in this position, and I'm going to switch these layers, turn on and off, and then one in that position. So I'll turn off hearts 1 as it is there, and under the share menu, I'm going to export a Jpeg. So basically, I'll be doing a loop of both versions of the heart. Okay, so I'm using AirDrop on my Mac to export it. For now, the comic machine is for the creation mode, or the editing mode, is creating the animation is only available on the desktop. So on the file here, I'm going to turn on hearts 2, It's fairly easy to understand here. I'm going to share a JPEG of that one. Great. So now let's go to thecomicmachine.com. I've already logged into my account, my beta account. This creator is actually still in beta. And I'm going to find the comic, the work in progress, the roommate from another galaxy right here. I'll click on it, and as it loads, I'll show you the text that I'm going to input. So the text is, like I said, there's no line breaks or anything here, so I'll show you how that will pan out when I insert it into the speech bubble. Okay, so the comic has loaded. If I bring my cursor down to the bottom, I can see all the pages that I've done so far. The page that I'm going to insert today is going in between this frame and this frame. So I just have to add, click on this plus sign, and it inserts a blank page. I'm going to upload the images that I've downloaded from my iPad. They're already sized in at 1024 by 768. That's the first frame, and I'm going to add the second frame, which is 24B. And so right now there is no duration, no looping. If I just play this page, it'll be just the basically the second page, because they both load instantly. And since the 24B is on top, that will be the one that we see. So the first thing I want to do is actually create this flickering of these hearts above the girl here. So I'm gonna create a loop of the two frames. So again, there's two frames here, one with the hearts in one position, the hearts in another position. So I'm not going to do anything with the first frame. What I'm going to do is actually fade the second frame in and out in a infinite loop. So the duration is the amount of fade in, and it'll fade in and out indefinitely. So I want a quick little flicker, so I think a 0.3 second would be a good one. I don't want a delay for this to happen. If I input for the repeat, if I put in -1, that is infinite loop, and I don't want to do auto reverse. So auto reverse meaning that it'll fade in and then it'll fade out. It won't just like disappear. And I want the start opacity to be 0, and then of course by default the end opacity is 1, which is 100%. And I want the easing as ease in and out, so it's a little more softer. So let's take a look at how that looks. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I'll put in a 0.4 just to see how that looks. I think that looks good. So the next thing I want to do is actually input the text. So if I'm not mistaken, the Duncan speaks first. I'm just going to grab the text here. I'm going to copy this line of text. So that's copied into the clipboard. Go back to our layer stack here. Let's add text. I'll copy this and paste it. So this is what Duncan says right off the bat. I think I've been using 6 pixels for the text. I'm gonna make the first word bold by putting an asterisk beside them. It automatically makes it bold. I'm gonna put the rest of it on a layer. Padding, I'm gonna have a 0. Oval shapes, curved tail. and a 1 pixel border. So he says, hey, how are you feeling? All right. I'm gonna do a fade in of 0.5. These in and out, and I'm just gonna go ahead and do the second bubble because they will both come in and stay on the screen. So I won't put a wait or a click in between the two text speech bubbles. All right, make it 6 point. So if your text is all, there's no breaks or any lines in between there, this would actually, by just sizing up the speech bubble, would actually give you would actually break down your text. But you can go in and actually manually do that as well. I'm going to apply the same settings for this bubble. Alright, just put a 15 pixel padding there to make it look, to give some more space. Alright, so just getting the right curve on here. So just make sure that none of the text is cut off. I'm just going to select some text here to bold, give it one more punch. I think Ralph probably is a good word to make bold. Ralph and Rally. Good to go, don't worry, I contain the puke. How about puke? It's always a good word to make bold. And the inside of it. Great. I'm going to save that, and again I'll add a 0.5 fade in, meaning so if I need a fade in, the start has to be 0 and the end will be 1, which is 1 is 100%, and I'll do a ease in and out. So after this speech bubble comes on, I want to put a wait button or a next button to come up, so the user will have to click it before they go on to the next frame. So let's take a preview of that. And then the click comes in there. Back to the text here. So what automatically when I put in this the wait, when I click this wait button, it would if the user clicks on it, it automatically clears all the text on the screen, so I don't have to actually go in and delete them. Let's run a better. So Lang says mostly. Oh, not, yeah, so Lang says mostly. Actually, you know what? He's supposed to say mostly. Right now, the comic machine doesn't have a connecting bubble. What we can do is, why don't I take out this wait here, and then add another text that just says mostly. How about dot mostly? Alright, so he says it kind of under his breath, so I'm not going to bolden that. I'm going to apply all the same settings. And I'll just do another bubble. Next to his head there. Probably want to see a wider tail was probably more appropriate here. how will we overlap that? All right. And again, I'm going to apply the same settings. I should think this is probably something that should be done by default. So the settings stay as you create the bubbles. Okay, so I think the mostly came up a little bit too fast, so I'm gonna add a delay before that comes out, so to give it a breather. Oops, too many dots there. 0.5 of a second before that comes up. So this is a great thing about the Combo Machine. It actually gives you the feeling of real dialogue. Gives you the pauses that dialogue as you read it to a certain degree. So I put in the weight after the mostly. So basically, any text I put in next would be on a clear screen as far as text is concerned. So Duncan, the geeky guys, delivers the next line. So what I want to do is I'm just gonna close this window here. So layer fire layer 6 is what the next one is. Put it to 6. I'll say no as the bold word in the speech bubble. Alright, and I'm going to quickly add all the same settings. Original was here. Alright, save 0.5 duration fade in, 0 opacity starting out. That's all I need to do. And I'm gonna copy the. Oh, right, he says something else. And how'd you know my name? So I'm gonna do the same thing where I just add another text above here. Now I didn't realize I needed more text, so I can go back and edit this and move it over a bit more, because to make room for another speech bubble that comes up. So I learned before that I'm going to add a delay before the next one, to just another delay before the next text comes up. Anyways, I'll explain this later here. And how'd you know my name? So name I would think should be bold. Give it a little more strength. Again, 6 point. Ovals, curved tail. 1 pixel border. I'll put that in here. Alright. Make it a little bit lower so that it's probably not necessary, since it's there's a time it comes up after the first bubble, so people would know when to read it, I think. So again, I'm gonna, as before where I had 2 text bubbles delivered back to back, I'm gonna add a 0.5 delay so that it seems like there's a pause before he says this. Opacity 0, ease in and out. And I'm not gonna add a weight because there's room to add more text that Lang would say. When I do that here, so he basically says easy. So that's easy enough to add, so I'm just going to add all of that before I preview it. So I'm guessing he says that kind of loudly, so I'm going to make that all bold. 6 pixels, curved tail, 2 pixel width, border 1. Alright. Okay. 0.5 duration, opacity to start is 0. ease in and out, and this is where the click goes. So let's preview the whole thing. Hopefully everything works out. Harry, how are you feeling? Never better. Well, mostly. How'd you know I was here? How'd you know I need? Easy. I think I'm gonna add a 0.5 delay before Lang replies. It just came up too quickly, and since I'm already, that layer is already open, put in the 0.5 right away. Full screen it. Great. So there you have it. Thanks for watching. I'll post the link for this comic in my description below. So yeah, if you like this video, feel free to subscribe, like it, share it, and all that jazz. So I'll talk to you next video. Thanks.